The M1 iPad Pro released back in April of 2021, and that's when Tim Cook dropped out of the ceiling, dropped that M1 chip into the iPad Pro, and they gave us that new mini LED display, at least for the 12.9-inch version, which is out of this world. But now with the addition of iPadOS 16 and things like Stage Manager like you see behind me, we are now really pushing the limits of what this M1 iPad Pro can do. So a lot of people think, and I'm included in that section of people, that we've reached peak iPad, especially from a hardware perspective. So now people are wondering, what is Apple gonna do to entice especially M1 iPad Pro owners to upgrade to an M2 iPad Pro, which should release towards the end of this year in 2022. So in this video, we're gonna talk about what the new 2022 iPad Pro will bring, and again, what will Apple do to really get us, amped up to upgrade our $1,100 minimum 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro. Let's talk about it. So let's talk about the new anticipated design for the 2022 iPad Pro, because again, I'm one of those people that think we've reached peak iPad design. In 2018, Apple dropped that new industrial design, so slim, they unified the bezels, they added Face ID in every orientation. I just thought that's it. Like, how much better can it really get, and what can Apple do to entice somebody like myself who loves the iPad Pro to upgrade to a newer version of it? So the first thing that we heard about was from Mark Gurman, was that Apple was playing with a glass back for the iPad Pro. They were playing with two variations. They were playing with one where the entire rear of the iPad would be glass, and they were playing with another one where they would enlarge the Apple logo on the rear of the iPad and make the Apple logo glass itself. Because if you add glass to the back of any device, that allows you to, guess what? Wirelessly charge that device. So there is rumors that Apple's bringing some sort of MagSafe, whether it is that puck design that we're getting in terms of MagSafe on the iPhones, or if it's some other version of MagSafe like Apple brought over to the new M2 MacBook Airs and also the M1 Pro MacBook Pro lineup that we got earlier when Apple reintroduced MagSafe. I would actually welcome wirelessly charging my iPad Pro, not in the same way that you would wirelessly charge your iPhone. It's going to be a little bit different. Actually, Pitaka has a great accessory that allows you to wirelessly charge your iPad mini. It's only made for the iPad mini. I tested it out. I actually thought it was a very good idea and a very good implementation. And I actually think it's a great implementation of that wireless charging, and I can see the benefits. And that was the biggest thing. I saw the benefits of what it would be like to wirelessly charge an iPad, so I'm all for it. So now let's talk about the size of these new iPad Pros. So since 2018 and that release of the 2018 iPad Pro, Apple has kept those same variations of iPads. They have the 11-inch iPad Pro and then the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. But this past year was the first time that Apple actually differentiated the hardware feature set between the two iPad Pros. Before this, it was purely just a size difference in terms of 11-inch versus 12.9. But with the 2021 iPad Pro, we did get a mini LED display and a $100 price hike for that 12.9-inch iPad Pro versus on the 11-inch iPad Pro, it remained with that same LCD Pro Motion display, which is amazing in its own right, but the mini LED, guys, is an amazing display. One thing that I did want to bring up in terms of the different sizes of the iPad Pro is that Ross Young from DSSC did mention that Apple is working on a larger iPad Pro, which again, I am all for. The bigger the better on these tablets. Ross Young was mentioning that we're going to be getting a 14.1-inch display diagonally for the iPad Pro, which would be an awesome addition to the lineup of the Pro lineup. But one thing that was mentioned in that is that it's not going to be released probably until 2023. So in my opinion, I think we're going to get some variation of the 11 and the 12.9-inch this year. And then maybe in a March event of 2023, Apple will surprise us with that one more thing and throw in a 14.1-inch iPad Pro. So keep that in mind if you really want to hold out for a larger display iPad to have around the house. So to round off the hardware design implementation, this is going to be a little bit of a wish list on my end. The number one thing that I would love Apple to do is to finally cave and accept that, at least on the iPad Pro side, most people are using the iPad Pro in landscape. So put the camera orientated in that landscape mode for video chat calls. Center Stage was a great addition from a software perspective to kind of ease that situation where you're not looking, to your bottom left for that camera, but it's still not perfect. And I would rather Apple just throw it, in landscape mode. Because again, I use my iPad 100% in landscape mode. There isn't a single situation where I put it in portrait mode. Even when I'm using it to edit thumbnails and things like that, it's always in landscape mode, especially for the 12.9-inch one, because for a lot of people, including myself, it is my computer of choice. So being able to have that camera in landscape mode would be beautiful. And I know a lot of people are saying, hey, the magnets are there for the Apple Pencil to charge it. Apple can definitely make room for something like that. But what I don't want them to do is to continue to adopt that notch design language on the iPad Pro. Like, I could see them maybe slimming down the bezels a little bit, moving that camera into that landscape orientation, but then doing something like what Samsung did or what they did with the M2 MacBook Air, and then including a notch into the iPad Pro, which I'm sure we would all get used to it, but I would prefer to not deal with another notch. So now let's move on to the anticipated, what I'm going to call the guts of the iPad Pro. So the internal specs of this new iPad Pro. So the first thing we're going to mention is that it's probably going to get an M2 chip splatted right in there the same way Tim Cook did it last year. And I know the M1 chip, when it was first put in the iPad Pro, people thought that macOS was coming to the iPad Pro, real pro level applications like Xcode, Final Cut Pro, the Adobe suite of products was all just going to be ported over to the iPad Pro. And a lot of people were disappointed. I'm a person where I think the App Store has enough applications on that pro level, and what I consider pro applications are applications that you can use in your professional life to make money. And those applications for me are LumaFusion, which is an alternative to Final Cut Pro, Affinity Photo, which is an alternative to Photoshop. And then again, the Microsoft suite of products, they all work on the iPad Pro and they work fairly well. But what I'm trying to say is that the M2 coming to the iPad Pro, do not think that Final Cut Pro is going to come over. Do not think Xcode is going to come over. I think Apple's just adding a little bit more CPU. So we're going to get 20% more CPU, 40% more GPU to handle things like Stage Manager behind me, which is still technically in beta, but it's still very, very broken, especially when using that secondary display. There's also rumors about a larger battery being implemented into the iPad Pro, which I'm very, very for, because right now, while using my M1 iPad Pro, if I'm doing something like video editing or maybe playing a video game, I'm only getting like 3 to 4 hours of battery life, which is kind of absurd for a device that's supposed to be, a very efficient and optimized device, especially if I'm playing games like on Apple Arcade, which are games that are supposed to be made for iOS and iPadOS devices. My battery life is still being drained extremely fast. So bringing in a larger battery cell is going to be a very welcome addition to the new iPad Pros. And then one big thing that's going to be haunting me up until that October release date, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is that hopefully the design won't be so different where we're going to need to have new accessories. Because the Magic Keyboard has been around, I think, since 2019, and it was $350. So if Apple tells me that I have to go buy another Magic Keyboard that has maybe some MagSafe pass-through capabilities or something along those lines, that's going to end up being $450 on top of a new $1,100 iPad Pro, a lot of people are not going to welcome that new Magic Keyboard case unless it does something functionally different. If it does something functionally different, maybe adds an extra port, or maybe that extra port can finally do data pass-through or things like that, then maybe there's a justification for it. But if it's literally just to fit a new form factor, people are going to be very, very upset. And same thing goes with the Apple Pencil 2. Hopefully we don't have to buy new accessories for an already very expensive device. So let's talk about launch date. The launch date is anticipated to be in that October timeframe, or at least the announcement, probably with pre-order shipping in early November. Apple with the iPad Pro is usually on an 18-month kind of cycle with that. So this 2021 iPad Pro came out in April. October puts us into that 18-month time frame, so expect it to be announced sometime in October. And then in terms of capacities and different variations of it, we're supposed to be getting the same exact variations. So the baseline model will still be at 128 gigs, which I hope is wrong, because 128 gigs on a computer-like device is not nearly enough in 2022. But you can spec it up all the way to 2 terabytes with that 16 gig of RAM config coming in at that 1 terabyte threshold, which is another thing I wish we could do. If I could get a 512 storage iPad Pro with 16 gigs of RAM, you can't really do that right now, and you probably will not be able to do that in the future with an M2 iPad Pro. And in terms of cost, it's going to stay relatively the same. We're still going to have an $800 11-inch iPad Pro because there is no indication that that 11-inch iPad Pro is going to get a mini LED. It's going to stay with the same ProMotion. So if you're sticking with that 11-inch iPad Pro, I think the only difference is going to be an M2 chip versus an M1 chip. Versus on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, we should be getting a little bit extra, but let's see what Apple does. But in terms of price, size configs, and all those variations, it's going to remain identical to last year. But that is going to do it for this video, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did make it to the very end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so that I know you made it to the very end. And also let me know, what would it take for you to upgrade from your current iPad to something like an M2 iPad Pro? What would Apple have to bring to the table in order for a justification to upgrade? Like I said, I'm an M1 iPad Pro user, so for me, they got to show me something in order for me to want to spend another $1,100 to $1,500 on a tablet. Because again, it is a tablet first. I know it's my computer of choice and I use it as a laptop, but for a lot of people, it's still just a tablet and a content consumption machine. So let me know in the comments below, like, what would you need out of an iPad Pro? Maybe an extra USB-C or Thunderbolt port, a headphone jack? What is it that would really make you say, all right, Apple, now I actually want to get an M2 iPad Pro? Or is it something on the software side? Like maybe you need iPadOS 16 to be more in order for you to upgrade to something like an M2 iPad Pro. But like I said, let me know in the comments down below so we can have a little bit of discussion. And shout out to Jose for writing this 9 to 5 article, which gave me the idea to make this video. But if you guys do want to watch some more iOS, iPadOS, or macOS content, click on one of these videos right here. But until next time, I'm Fernando, and I'm out of here. Stay tuned for the new Beta 4 updates because they should be coming out soon.